This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Corenna and Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different Q's.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Corenna Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Joining us in studio is Maine Secretary of State and Democratic gubernatorial candidate Shenna Bellows. Thank you so much for making the trip.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good morning.
Let's talk about Maine's new license plates. They've drawn some attention. First of all, they're being printed in Canada, and now I understand there's 3,600 being reprinted over visibility issues. What's your perspective on how this unfolded?
As Secretary of State, I didn't realize that a huge part of my job would be license plates, and Mainers love their license plates. So my first term, we dealt with the dirty license plates, the controversy over vanity plates with the F word and whatnot. And as former head of the ACLU, I never thought I'd be in that business of reviewing license plate language, but here we are. Now, with the new license plate, it's interesting. The standard nationally is to replace license plates every 5 to 10 years because we think of the license plate as decoration or individual expression. But the real function of the license plate is two things: identification by law enforcement or the easy pass and the tolling authorities, and safety. Because if you're stuck on the side of the road in a storm or at night, you're out of gas or your engine's died, that license plate has that retro reflectivity that helps other people see you no matter what. So it's safety and identification. Here we have the chickadee, which I love. I'm a birder, but it is over 25 years old. I was in high school in the 90s when we went from the lobster to the chickadee, right? Probably if you start to look at them, you'll notice that a lot of our license plates across the state are gray. They're beat up. You can't see the chickadee anymore. Yeah. And our technology, the databases back then, we don't know when people got their license plates. So if we just said, okay, everybody turn in your license plates and get a new chickadee, guess who would do that? The law-abiding folks. Guess who wouldn't? The ones that are pretty happy that the tolling authorities can no longer read their plates and that law enforcement can't see them on a surveillance camera. That's why states have to change up the design on a fairly regular basis for your standard plate. So the legislature approved the pine tree and the North Star and an alternative for people that don't like the pine tree or the North Star. And actually that went through the Transportation Committee. It ended up going through unanimously because of that option. So people would have choices. So we went out to bid because Maine forever has manufactured our license plates at the Maine State Prison. It's an aging facility. The machines we use, they don't make them anymore. They don't make the parts. So every time they break down, we've got some guys at the prison that figure out how to put them together. And they simply can't do, you figure there are over 1 million sets of plates that are standard. They couldn't do 2 million individual plates. No way, no how. That would take them years. And so we had to go out for bid. There's one company that does most states in the country. On the West Coast, it's American based. On the East Coast, it's in Canada. And that was Waldale. They were the only bidder, but they gave us a very reasonable bid. We're able to do it within existing funds that the BMV has been saving over time. There's not an additional cost to the taxpayer unless you want to custom order your plate. It turns out Mainers also really love their specific numbers.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
So production's going pretty well. You figure we're doing about 2 million plates with a small subset, 1,800 sets or 3,600 plates. There was a misprint with a spacing. Mm-hmm. So if you're one of the lucky customers that got the misprint with the unusual spacing, well, you might have a collector's item. They caught it pretty quickly. The manufacturer corrected it, no cost to the state, and they'll issue those corrections later this summer. It's not really a big deal. I think anybody that does high-level manufacturing knows that sometimes when you're running a job, there's some kinks that you have to iron out in the beginning, and they've been great to work with. We really have appreciated Waldale. It's been a challenging time because when you have a company that has both American-based and Canadian-based sites, and we're working with Canada, and then suddenly there's the potential tariffs, holding our breath, making sure, hoping that the costs don't go up. But so far, they've been great to work with, and we're keeping it under budget, and people are getting their new plates, and I really like them. I think they look cool.
The folks that have received the 3,600 plates that need to be replaced, if they go through Easy Pass and then they get a bill that they didn't pay, is there a process for that? Are you able to flag that?
Yes. And this was, again, I didn't realize how much time I would spend on plates when I started, but I've become an expert. You know, the number one is some people have number one on their plate. Charlie Summers, former Secretary of State, has the number one chickadee plate. Previous secretaries issued duplicates in all different designs. So there's a number one in the Sportsman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, turns out the Easy Pass is reading the number letter combinations and not always reading the designs. So we deal with it all the time, confusion, usually from out-of-state tolling authorities. Because if you've got the Easy Pass on your car, it's going to read as long as you've got money, you're going to be fine, right? And it's usually when they're taking a screen grab because you don't have money or you didn't do the Easy Pass and you forgot and you didn't pull over into the cash lane. I don't think there's going to be a huge impact. Most of those folks are either going to have the Easy Pass or they're going to be paying cash. But where there is a problem, just like with those duplicate plates that are still out there on the road, we've got systems to fix it. We've got a good relationship with the tolling authorities, and that'll be fine. And again, they're going to get their replacements pretty soon, so it shouldn't be a big deal.
So what inspired your decision to run for governor?
Well, I love being Secretary of State. And one of the things that I have done as Secretary of State, I ran on a platform of modernization to better serve our customers. And we have customers just like Quirk Auto does, right? That's who we serve. So in a variety of areas, you know, with elections in my first term, created automatic voter registration. When we prove your citizenship at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, you can register to vote right then. And that's great for the 16-year-olds. They can pre-register to vote when they get their first license. Last year, I implemented online voter registration, very secure, top-of-the-art cybersecurity protections, but we had over 35,000 Maine citizens register to vote using online voter registration last year. With the BMV, I implemented appointments at the BMV, and thank goodness I did, because now with the Real ID, it's a lot easier if you make an appointment than going to wait.
It certainly is.
But also like working with car dealers like yourselves. I heard from car dealers that the paper-based title process was just taking too long. So we put together a working group and we have a strategic plan to move to an electronic option for everyone. But in the interim, we've already implemented it a year ago. Our big lenders like TD Bank North or the big banks or actually any credit union or bank can choose an electronic lien option so that we're exchanging that paperwork electronically rather than sending paper to warehouses across the country. So trying to modernize our services. And then in corporations, which I run, we implemented remote online notarization so realtors can do transactions with out-of-state parties in a very secure but also very efficient way. Those are some of the things that we did. We have more things planned from a modernization perspective, but I look at state government and there's both so much potential but also so much bureaucracy. There is red tape. When people talk about government efficiency and red tape, when my Republican friends on the other side of the aisle raise concerns about that, they're right. And we need to do what we've been doing at the Secretary of State's office. Government should serve the people like the people are government's customers, because they are. And so really constituent services, modernization, those are two of my watchwords. And then also bridge building, which sounds odd, right? Like I'm former head of the ACLU. I've certainly at different times made decisions that I thought were the right thing to do under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but sometimes have been controversial. But I've also brought Republicans, independents, and Democrats together in the legislature to fund these modernization projects on my budget initiatives, on my ideas about where we should go as a state. And I think bridge building is really important right now.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons for our podcast.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. You'll have anybody on, even the Secretary of State, right?
Yeah.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Maine's Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows.
As running for governor, how are we going to get more businesses into the state of Maine? Obviously, we had a high property tax, income tax, the new paid family leave 1% tax. How are you going to be different to try to get more business in?
Well, I'd love to turn that question right back around to you as a successful business owner. You know, my father, one of the things that did inform my work as senator and now as secretary is my experiences being the daughter of a self-employed carpenter contractor. And he grew that business over 40 years in Hancock County, and watching him grapple with him and my mother trying to file their taxes. You got to file with the Department of Labor when you hire or fire. You got to abide by OSHA requirements. You've got to file with corporations and Secretary of State. Depending on which entity you are, if you're a regulated entity, you might have to be regulated like the dealers are by the BMV, right, or other industries are by the Department of Professional Financial Regulation. I think you should have a one-stop shop in state government for all of it. You should be able to, whether it's an online portal or a mobile unit that can go into a community or an office that you can go into and just do it all, have everything that you need right there file one time and have it go out to the various entities. I really do think we need to think about how do we make it easier to do business in our state. And then in terms of the tax code, I believe in tax fairness and what that looks like. I am concerned about property taxes. When I was a senator, I worked when LePage was governor and I was in the state Senate. I worked on revenue sharing to the municipalities, school funding from the state because the state really needs to pay its fair share, and property tax credits. And I really do think we need to look at the overall tax code and how it's fair and what's unfair and think about that. Then I also think we need public-private partnerships, thinking about where we can do things together. Just again, those ideas I had at the BMV, it wasn't my idea to do electronic lien and titling. That came from the dealers. It wasn't my idea to do remote online notarization. That came from the realtors. And so I think going out and listening to businesses to talk about how can the state better serve and better partner with business to move Maine forward.
So thinking about expenses, I brought in as you know, we sell EVs here and we sell quite a bit. We're at the Hyundai store where we sell the most of. On these policy charges, on our charges, they're $864 per line. So we have 3 line of charges, which totals up to $2,500. And I was showing you this bill where we only collected $2,200. Forget the $1,500 transportation or the $1,500 distribution charge from Versant. We're losing about $7,000 or $8,000 a month.
In electric bills?
In electric bills.
For the chargers.
Just for the electric charges. Forget the buildings, because all you hear about is McCrum at $56,000, but it's happening to every store, pizza joints, grocery stores. If the state of Maine wants to get more involved with electric cars, they got to come up with a better way, either Versant or CMP, they're both similar, to come up with a better way so people can charge their cars without paying $4 a kilowatt or really $400 to charge up a car, which is really what the price is.
The affordability, there was a poll recently, Pan Atlantic poll, that said that cost of living and affordability is the number one issue across Maine. For businesses, as you're describing, and for individuals and for households and for families. I do think the cost of electricity is something that has just skyrocketed in Maine. And so we really need to think about how we're diversifying our energy portfolio and how are we keeping an eye on infrastructure, because how are we making sure that we're distributing the costs of transmission and distribution? I don't think there's an easy answer here. I think part of it lies in having an energy strategy. There's talk about a Department of Energy and having it be a cabinet level position to look at energy and look at the whole picture of supply and transmission of electric and heating, I'm sure, is a driver for this business in the wintertime and cooling in the summertime, right? And so I do think that is something we've got to take a comprehensive look at. We got to think about our sources of electricity. We got to think about that and how that's driving up costs. And then we need to think about our infrastructure. So I'm not saying there's like a silver bullet. I think if there were, they'd done it already. But I do think it's a very serious problem. So my parents were very young when I and then my sister and then my brother were born, and my dad's starting out as a self-employed carpenter. My mother was staying home with us kids, and they bought a piece of land in Hancock, and we lived in a tent that summer while they dug out an old cellar hole, put a cap on it. We lived in the basement that winter. It was down a long dirt driveway, right? My mom, it was important for her to stay home with us when we were small, and sometimes she'd work nights over in the light bulb filament factory that there used to be in Sullivan, Elscott's, or in the, there used to be a Christmas wreath factory in Ellsworth for a while. Right. She'd do that. When I was in 5th grade, she went to work full-time at Surrey Gardens, which is a greenhouse.
I love Surrey Gardens.
Don't you love Surrey Gardens?
We love Surrey Gardens.
Yeah, she worked there for 20 years. But when she went to work full-time, when I was in the 5th grade, and she felt like we could be home by ourselves, after school, I was pretty responsible. That's when we could afford to put the poles in that road and get that electricity. Well, that feels like ancient history, right? Like that's many, many years ago. But what I worry about is with the cost of electricity, I bet there are households that are wondering whether they can keep electricity in their homes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, for families, individuals, not only businesses, but I think that's part of the reason some of the small businesses are closing. We're hearing about so many closings. So it's something the next governor really needs to focus on, electricity cost. I agree.
Yeah, especially because, they try to run these power lines down and you really don't understand what side that you're supposed to be on because it's so confusing, you know what I mean, as far as bringing power down from Canada to Massachusetts. So hopefully the next governor will be able to increase the electricity so maybe it'll drive the prices down.
And get people in a room to talk
Yeah.
it through. I'm sure the solutions exist. It's just that people, to your point, are talking past each other or talking at each other instead of coming together. When I chaired the Labor and Housing Committee when I was in the Senate my second term, the unions wanted to bring workers' compensation reforms because there were workers that were getting injured on the job or dying on the job, and they thought there were some improvements that could be made. Chamber of Commerce came out fiercely against it. We met for hours over the course of weeks until we could get a solution that everybody was okay with. We had a unanimous vote in that committee except for one person. And then it went under the hammer in the House and the Senate. These are workers' compensation reforms that had shut down state government when McKernan was governor, right? The controversies around that. So I think, when you look at these tough issues, when you look at energy, for example, the solutions exist and people have the same goals. Like with workers' compensation, no one wants workers to get hurt, but people don't want to drive businesses out of business, right? Those are common goals. With electricity, everybody wants affordable, reliable, sustainable energy. And if it can be green, even better, right? But let's stop yelling at each other and maybe get in a room and talk it through, even if it takes weeks.
Work together.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. So with these hospitals like Inland and Waterville closing and MDI's birthing center, how would you address the gaps in rural health care, and what role should the state play in keeping this care local?
I think this is the issue I'm hearing. The cost of living is huge. Housing is another big issue. And then healthcare is the third. And again, growing up as I did, neither of my parents, they were hard workers. They didn't have health insurance until my dad didn't have it until the Affordable Care Act under the Obama administration. And my mom didn't have it until at age 49, she went back to school. I'm so proud of her. She became a nurse through the University of Maine system.
Good for her.
Yeah, started at UMA, then UMaine Orono. And she got healthcare for the first time when she went back to school. So I saw my parents, go their whole lives without health insurance, without access to primary care. And they were lucky, but that can get really expensive if you don't take care of primary care needs. So when I think about what Maine can do, I do think expanding coverage. I very much agree with Governor Mills in terms of the Medicaid expansion she did when she first came in, because it expands the number of people who have basic coverage. I do think we have to focus on primary care because we can't do all the things, right? We can't pay for all of the things, especially if the federal government moves forward with these cuts. And that really worries me because right now, 1 in 5 Mainers is a beneficiary of Medicaid, which the federal government, the current budget, is talking about cutting. So what can we do in the state? We got to focus on infrastructure and primary care, because if we can at least provide primary care to folks, that's going to save the state money in the long run. It's going to reduce the impact on ERs and more complicated, more costly care. So I think that's the approach that I would take. And we're seeing birthing centers close all over the state. Mm-hmm. I was up in Presque Isle last weekend and the Fort Kent Center is closed. The Holton Center closed. So what's happening? Women are having babies in ambulances. So then I was down in York County the next day and they just had a center close. And I was talking to this guy. He's a medical provider, actually, works at the hospital. I won't say which one. And he said, when I started my practice, when I moved to Maine in the 80s, this was a hospital that was really connected to the community. It was doing really well. So I think maybe we need to take a look. What were we doing 40 years ago where we had rural hospitals and rural health centers flourishing? And what's changed? And how can we look at our history to see where we might make some improvements in hard times?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. These are great questions.
Thank you. For those just joining us, you are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Maine's Secretary of State and Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Shenna Bellows. What is the process for drafting citizens' initiative questions? We had Matt Dunlap in here a few weeks ago, and he said it can vary and that it's shaped by current Secretary of State. He did tell us his approach, but I'm curious, what is your office's approach?
Now we're talking about fun stuff, elections. I really love the work that we do in elections. And did you know Maine was #1 in 2022 in the nation in voter participation? We have more Mainers turn out to vote than others.
I think that's great.
Me too. So questions for the citizens' initiatives. And remember, the citizen initiative process is in the Maine Constitution. And it allows any group of citizens to bring any idea they want to the ballot if they can get 10% of the signatures of the voters who voted in the last gubernatorial. So it's about 60,000 signatures these days. So they bring their idea. And if they get the signatures, then the Secretary of State has the authority and responsibility to draft a question that is clear and understandable to the voters. my process is I bring together an internal group, someone from the AG's office to help me think through how am I capturing the legal aspects of the law, some of the nonpartisan folks in the elections office to help me understand how these questions have been drafted in the past and what is the most objective way to move this forward. And then someone from my communications team to think about how are we making it something that's going to be readable and understandable to the voters. And then I ultimately take responsibility for drafting a question. But that's not where it stops. It goes out to the public. So I post it on the website. I send it to the people that brought the initiative in the first place. And there's a 30-day public comment period. So any member of the public can let me know, how would they write it differently? What would they change? What do they like? What don't they like? That's really interesting. You know, sometimes there's like 1 or 2 comments. Sometimes there are hundreds of comments. And as secretary, it's my responsibility to read every single one of those comments and consider, why would I accept that comment? Or why am I not accepting that recommendation? Oftentimes, I will change a question based on the public comment period because I really am genuinely interested in what the public has to say about how that should be worded. And then I reissue the question, but that's not the last step. At that point, folks can sue if, proponents or opponents of the question, people who are in favor or against, who like the way the question is written or don't like the way the question is written, they can bring me to court. And the courts can direct that a question be amended. And as Secretary of State, it's part of the job. I get sued sometimes by the Democrats, sometimes by the Republicans. I'm sure Matt said the same thing.
He did.
I inherited some of his lawsuits.
He certainly did. And as we all know, you can't please everybody.
No, you can't. You have to do what you think is right under the Constitution, under the law. We swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of the state. And if the courts overturn you, all right, so be it. But it is a really fun aspect of the job. As head of Maine State Archives, I oversee all of the historical records of the state, including the Constitution of Maine. We're over 200 years old. And we also have all the drafts of the Constitution, like places where they literally were like crossing out words. So, we took our Constitution from Massachusetts. So originally they were thinking we'd be the Commonwealth of Maine because Massachusetts is a Commonwealth. And you can see where they crossed out Commonwealth and put in state. So when I think about this question and how I do the drafting, I think about, this is a process going back 200 years and all of the important documents in our state. There's been some sort of drafting process and reflection.
Sure. Oh, I love that. I love historic. That's amazing. I didn't realize you were in charge of that for some reason.
Yeah. Come down anytime. It's open to the public. And hopefully we'll be moving back into the cultural building where the Maine State Museum is pretty soon. And people can walk right in and check out some of those records. But they're the people's records.
Right.
That's right. And you also, what triggered my memory was in Deer Isle, the deed in Deer Isle. So I know this is kind of wonky, but it actually states if you've had a property that used to be Massachusetts and it's on the ocean, it will say that you own the property up to low tide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
And it's because that historical tradition coming from Massachusetts.
Yes. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we're one of the few that have it up to low tide, even though they keep trying to take that away.
Well, one thing, we've been talking a lot about bringing people together. And in 2026, the nation celebrates its 250th birthday.
That's right.
It's another fun part of my job. I chair the Maine Semi-Quincentennial Commission. That's a mouthful, but it's the America 250th birthday. We're doing some fun things in Maine. We have this Maine Atlas project where we're recruiting people to share their favorite people, places, things. What makes Maine Maine? What is reflective of our culture, our history, this place that we might put into almost like a choose your own adventure, like a travel guide to go around in celebration of America's 250th birthday. So we're doing some fun things like that. And those are areas, right, where we can all just come together. Our history.
That's right.
How we are, who we are, and, perhaps our shared vision for the future.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe when they come down to Stonington and get a lobster, they can look at Egg-and-Moggan Reach.
Ooh, Stonington, Deer Isle. Stonington is a beautiful part of the state. So is Hancock, where I grew up. But.
Absolutely, Hancock. I love crossing that bridge. Matter of fact, there's a veggie stand right there that I always stop at. Do you know which one that is?
I don't. When I was a kid, my mom worked at the veggie stand for a while during the summers, Ralph's Farm. Right on Route 1. And the bridge used to be the singing bridge. And at night you could hear it hum because it was an old iron bridge. So that's definitely.
And we still have singing bridges in Maine.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Love that. Before we let you go, as you've traveled the state campaigning, what are the top concerns that you're hearing from voters? Has that shifted your thinking on any key issues?
Well, I do think that our next governor needs to be the governor of the whole state. So I think it is equally important to represent rural areas in CD2 and CD1 and to really travel across the state. So I've been to Presque Isle, Sangerville, Farmington, Bangor, Hancock, and I've been to Cape Elizabeth, Portland, York, Auburn, Augusta. Representing the whole state is really important. But you know what's really interesting is people are talking about the same things. They're talking about the housing crisis. So I was talking to folks on Monhegan Island and then in Presque Isle and then in York County, and every single one of them said there's not enough housing. It's a mix of things. It's red tape. It's the regulatory burden, the cost per square foot of a new build because of state decisions, and it's investment and thinking about how we support more affordable housing. I hear a lot about that. I hear a lot about the cost of living and property taxes. That was the number one issue in my state Senate district, which voted for Donald Trump and voted for me in 2016. And that was something I spent a lot of time on as a state senator. I think we need to be thinking about that and the cost of living. And I'm hearing a ton about healthcare because the people are pretty concerned about the closures that are happening all across the state. And healthcare is a cost of doing business. If you want to stay in Maine and raise a family and live and retire here, you need to have access to healthcare. And if everything's shutting down, even if you can afford it, you're not going to be able to get it. And so I do think that's top of mind for a lot of folks. So I think those are, it's always the economy. If you don't have a job, if you can't start a business, if you can't provide for yourself and your family, everything else falls away. But it's the economy, it's healthcare, it's housing, cost of living. Those are the things that I'm hearing everywhere I go. And I'm going to continue to go everywhere. I'm headed up to Gouldsboro and Machias this weekend, doing an event actually in Skowhegan this week. And, I learned hard work growing up as I did, working through high school and college, being a Subway sandwich artist. I don't know if you ever went to the Tidal Falls Lobster Pound back in the day. It doesn't exist anymore, but I worked in the kitchen there. And I think I'll work hard and I will represent the whole state. That's my goal.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. We know you're busy.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much. You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.